afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us at this last section. I will start with cyber warfare attacks. Humankind, the history of humankind is the history of war. As long as humanity existed, we have known war, and war was often the first or the only way to resolve our conflicts. So those of us wishing for world peace, like on these Miss Beauty contests, it's time to wake up from that dream. Humanity will never change, but what does change is the way we do warfare. War does change by introducing new elements, new technology, and digital technology, digital information technology is no exception. So what I want to analyze is how this digital technology is being now used in modern warfare. So let's start with the definition. First, we have to say that there is no clear definition of cyber warfare. We do not know what this is. There is a lot of different definitions by different authors, but we need a working definition at least for this section. So we can say this is using computer technologies to disrupt or destroy an adversary's information systems and networks. And then we can add which amount to an armed attack. So it must have a serious effect. So if, for example, if someone attacks your mobile phone and steals your naked pictures, this is not an armed attack, nobody cares. But then we have to add that cyber warfare is always connected with the army of an individual country. So it's a military operation. So first we have to distinguish this from normal hacker attacks. So if we have a hacker group attacking a power plant of a nation and it's not connected with another state, then we do not talk about cyber warfare. We just talk about cyber attacks. It's important to add that the range and the scope of cyber warfare attacks is much more serious and wider than normal cyber attacks, because the goal is to paralyze the country's national security or infrastructure or something similar. So it is quite a serious thing to discuss. And now the question is, how are cyber warfare attacks defined? Do we have any kind of legislation, any kind of documentation, convention that defines this, or there is nothing? So first of all, I have found out that there is no main document, legal document, international document that would define cyber warfare. So if you want now a direct legal definition, there is none. But cyber warfare can be tracked in numerous different legal acts. So let's see which ones. So the first one would be the UN Charter. So probably the most important one. And in Article 2.4, we see that we have the prohibition of force. So none of the member states can threaten or use force against territorial integrity or political independence of another state. So the question here is the use of force. So is force considered cyber warfare attack? So for example, we can send a group of soldiers and a tank and destroy nuclear facilities of another state. But we can also use hackers from our main country to also, in a way, destroy the functioning of this nuclear power plant, because all the major infrastructure today is working on digital technology. So if this is not force, so if a cyber warfare attack is not considered as force, then the UN Charter cannot be applicable. And in traditional sense and legal doctrine, the use of force always meant the use of military force and excluded non-military forms of coercion. So if it's not a military attack, it's not the use of force in the sense of the UN Charter. There is only one way how a force can be justified by the UN Charter, and that is self-defense. So if a country is attacked by another military operation from another state, it can use force to defend itself. But now, again, the question is, if we use cyber attacks to defend or attack another state, is this self-defense or not? So how to now solve this issue? So in my opinion, there are two solutions. So the first solution is the traditional solution, or the traditional doctrine, which would say if there was no military operation, there was no soldiers, there was no tanks, this is not the use of force under the UN Charter doctrine. So you can, it's not relevant. So we are in a gray area where the state now decides what they will do when another state, for example China, is by using their national hackers is attacking us. So what we will do against China to combat this. So in a gray area. Or we can take a more modern approach and say that the use of force when the severity of this cyber attack is the same as if it was an armed attack, is considered force after the UN Charter, and then we must, of course, report it to the United Nations, and then we will find a solution on the United Nations. So this would be a modern approach. The two solutions, as of now, as of the doctrine that is relevant now, the first solution I think would be applicable, but of course I think maybe this will have to change in the future. So the next documents that we must look at are the international humanitarian law. So we have the Hague Conventions and the Geneva Conventions. And of course, at the time they were written, there was no cyber attacks mentioned because there were no computers, there were no mobile phones at the time these conventions were written. So now, again, we come to the question, can we use these conventions for cyber warfare attacks or not? And in these conventions, it is clearly stated that international armed conflicts exist where there is a resort to armed force between states. So these conventions explicitly state that it must be an armed force or in some kind of an armed attack. So again, traditionally, we have to say cyber warfare attacks do not apply, cannot be applicable to humanitarian law. I would propose, and there were some, of course, other propositions, a hybrid solution or a hybrid model, meaning that cyber attacks can constitute a violation of these conventions, but only when they are used together, when they are combined with traditional war crimes. So not by themselves, but in combination like a hybrid model. Okay, if we go further on, Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. Of course, one of the most important international legal institutions. It has its own problems. The main problem, of course, is that all the bigger military forces of the world, like China, USA, Russia, did not sign the Rome Statute. So the Rome Court, or the International Criminal Court, has no jurisdiction over these countries and the crimes they commit. But the jurisdiction of this court is only limited to 4 crimes: the crime of genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and the crime of aggression. And of course, we could analyze now if cyber warfare attacks can be applicable to some of these options. I will not go through all of them because it would take probably too much time. But again, this hybrid model is quite likely to be used, at least in the first 3 cases of genocide, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, where of course we can use cyber warfare attacks together with classical warfare to produce some of these most serious crimes on the international level. Maybe in some cases, even cyber attacks on their own could produce the results. Like for example, if we have maybe water supply that is completely operated by information system, and then we destroy the information system and there is no water for the people there, it could produce the same results as a military attack, although it's only a cyber warfare attack. So maybe it's time to think of some new approaches to cyber warfare. Okay, so the next document, and probably this one is now the one that we finally get some solutions what to do, is the Convention on Cybercrime. So this was established in 2001 right here in Budapest. And it defined on the international level, and all the European countries have signed this convention, what are the most basic crimes connected to cybercrime. And it made a list of all the crimes that now are in kind of a harmonization system for all the European countries. And we have here illegal access, we have illegal interception, data interference, system interference. And the solution here is that when another state performs a cyber attack on another state, on a European country, this would always be and almost certainly be a criminal offense in that state. So at least we have something now to do legally, and this is criminal prosecution of such attacks by the perpetrators, probably from a foreign state. So we can use, and each country has implemented these crimes in its own legislation. It's a cyber attacks or data interference or system interference. And there are some, probably if it's an important information system, like from a nuclear plant or power plant, it can be quite high penalties for such crimes. In Slovenia, for example, up to 8 years, in other countries even more. So, but of course, this document is now 20 years old. European Union has taken on the reins and on the basis on the convention signed or implemented a directive EU on attacks against information systems. So this directive is quite similar to the convention. Again, it has some measures that must be taken on the national level, which is very similar to the convention. So the countries, European countries that have signed the convention, and these are all the European countries, the directive is quite similar, so no real change except for introducing some penalties and liabilities for legal persons, but otherwise no serious change. Okay, so the last thing I want now to discuss is, does the European Union have its own criminal law? So is there a criminal law of the European Union? So if one state is attacked from, let's say, outside of the European Union with cyber warfare attack, can we together combat this crime from outside, or do we have any kind of options, legal or no? So the first question is there a European criminal law in the sense that the EU acts as a sovereign state, formulates criminal acts, carries out criminal prosecution and sanctions perpetrators of criminal acts? So the European Union acts as federal state and prosecutes. And the answer is no. So there is no unification on this level. But what we do have is European Union implementing some directives with criminal repercussions for the states in order to protect its financial interest. So the European Union has the ability to pose directives to the states and thereby ordering them to implement some criminal acts, but only in the sense of protecting financial interests. What about implementing a European criminal code? So a criminal code that would be unifying for the whole European Union. We have talked something about joint army of the European Union. So the European Union has its, kind of a joint army, but without its criminal code, I do not imagine how this will work. Because if you want to have a joint army, you need the criminal code now for this joint operation. Because if the soldiers will now conduct some criminal activities, who is going to prosecute them? And if the criminal legislation is different in each state, how will we solve this problem? So is there a criminal code of the European Union? And the answer is clearly no. Why? Because the criminal code, together with the constitution of the state, presents the most basic legal document of sovereignty of the state. So this means that the state can say itself what kind of criminal acts will be punishable in the country, and it has the jurisdiction to prosecute these crimes. So there is not an entity from the outside that says this must be a criminal offense, this will not be a criminal offense, and this will be the sentences. So this, if the states of the European Union, in a way, allow this would be this would be a very serious blow to the sovereignty of the state. And I do not think the European countries are ready for this. Maybe never will. But what we do have an option is Article 83 of the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union, which, as I said before, the European Union has the option to adopt directives to combat cross-border crimes that threaten the economic interest of the EU. But this does not mean that the European Union can just impose any kind of criminal offense that they wish. but only in the areas that are defined in the treaty. And one of these areas, let's say others are corruption, money laundering, drug trafficking, but one of them is also computer crime. So from the legal aspect, or let's say from the non-legal aspect, this is great. Okay, computer crime, we can now do everything we like and impose criminal legislation on the states, because we have defined here that computer crime can also be imposed. But from the criminal law aspect, this is the problem of how should I say, clear definition of the offense. So what is computer crime? This is very vague. Computer crime can be everything. It can be attacking your mobile phone, or it can be destroying the information system of the nuclear power plant. So you have to very clearly define what you mean, and this is not, there is no principle of legality here. So what can we say that here this means? So in my opinion, the European Union can only impose criminal sanctions regarding to the definition that was in that former directive. I mentioned a directive of the EU on cyber attacks. So this is the only option that they have in this regard. So in a way to conclude, for the purpose of prosecuting cyber warfare attacks within the EU, maybe there is no essential need to amend the EU legislation. Because the crimes that we have now cover most of the offenses that could be then treated as cyber attacks or cyber warfare attacks. But we have to know that all this legislation, EU legislation and national legislation, was not written for the purposes of war attacks or war operations. This was written for normal cyber attacks by hackers, by normal people. So if we want to, in a way, protect EU against possible cyber warfare attacks, something will have to be done. Right now, the treaty, I don't think, give us much. The treaty of the European Union, I don't think it has the legal basis to do much in this regard. So it's up to the states what kind of legislation they will implement. Otherwise, some serious changes on the EU will be needed. Thank you very much.